Hi. So when you're coming into Overeaters Anonymous and trying to move through your addiction recovery, your food addiction recovery, it's very, very important for you to recognize that there is a big difference between the 12 steps of addiction recovery and also the tools. So these are actual formal things. So let me explain where they came from and what they are. So in the Overeaters Anonymous program, you are going to hear a lot of talk about the 12 steps. The 12 steps are what we find in Alcoholics Anonymous. They can be universally applied to any addiction. Each of the 12 steps really just teaches us how to move into that space that we share with our higher power, to allow our higher power to come in and unravel our addiction a little bit more. So there's not a single one of the 12 steps that says stop your addiction. There's not a single one of the 12 steps that says to use a sponsor or to anything like that. The steps really are designed as a blueprint for how to more fully lean into a warm and intimate relationship with our higher power. As we do that, we find that we are satisfied in new and beautiful ways and no longer have a use for our addiction. Keep doing those 12 steps and you will find the recovery, the relief, and the freedom that you ache for right now. Those miracles will happen as you work those 12 steps. Now, it's very important to understand that those are very different than the tools. And this is something you can find on the OA website. The tools are actually a thing, but you need to know what they are, and absolutely you need to understand that they are optional. They are there as suggested tools, things that you can use to help support you on your journey. However, if at any point you feel like these tools are complicating your ability or willingness to do the steps, then stop them. And what I mean is that sometimes a sponsor, or maybe we just don't understand the program yet, we think that the tools are requirements, that we have to do all 12 steps plus all of these 9 tools, and that sounds like a lot, and it's really hard, and now it becomes a program that seems impossible to do, impossible to manage. So let me tell you what the 9 steps are, the 9 steps of Overeaters Anonymous. I'm sorry, not steps. These are the tools, the 9 tools of Overeaters Anonymous. 1, a plan of eating, which means you come up with a plan of eating and you're going to stick to it. Some people do 3 meals, 2 snacks a day. Some people say, whatever it is, I just can't eat sugar or white flour ever again. You just kind of come up with a plan of eating and stick to it. Another tool that people use is sponsorship. They might choose to use a sponsor. They might choose to sponsor themselves. Perhaps meetings. Meetings are a great tool to go to. You can go and you can fellowship with other people, listen to what people are saying, sharing their stories of hope and recovery. Another tool that you might use is the telephone, basically reaching out to others and connecting with other people in the fellowship. Writing, a great tool to use to journal and to get a little more expressive with our feelings and understand better what's going on in our life. Literature, using the different books that we can get our hands on to read about this experience and how people are recovering. For instance, the Overeaters Anonymous book or the Alcoholics Anonymous book. An action plan, coming up with an action plan of things that you will do to try to maintain your abstinence. Anonymity, you maintain anonymity by showing up to meetings and not sharing, who you see there, what you see there, what you hear there. That all stays anonymous. And then service, you show up and you are serving where you can. So these are tools. These are not the 12 steps of recovery. They have nothing to do with the 12 steps of addiction recovery. They are often, you'll see them, introduced in the meetings, in the groups, and the programs, but they are separate from them. So some of these, you might look at those and be like, yeah, I want to use some of those. Those are helpful. I can tell you that in the beginning of my journey, I did use several of these tools, and they benefited for me. They benefited me. I only used them as much as they helped me. I didn't use them when they didn't. Now, when I first came into the program over 15 years ago, nobody explained to me that there was a difference. Nobody even explained to me that there were tools. I just got adopted by a sponsor who told me what I was supposed to do. She told me that this is how she learned to do the program, and now she was going to teach me how she learned it and how she did it and how she got skinny. I'm not even going to use the word recovered because I don't know if she was, but she was skinny and I wanted what she had. So she asked me to go to 90 meetings in 90 days before she would even begin giving me the 12 steps of addiction recovery. She wasn't going to teach me step 1 until I had gone to 90 meetings in 90 days. And so that was a tool I used at the time, with sponsorship and meetings. And since then, though, coming back into the program, I've learned to do things a different way. It still took me a minute because even my sponsor, when I came back into the program several years ago, after hitting my last rock bottom, no one explained to me that there were tools and steps and that they were different. So, for instance, like the plan of eating, I didn't know that was optional. Until I came back and I had a sponsor who said, "Oh, we don't have to do a plan of eating. We'll just do it by the big book, the Alcoholics Anonymous book. We'll just go through that one, and I will teach you the steps. I'm not going to give you a plan of eating or look over your shoulder." But I also didn't know that it wasn't required to use a sponsor. I thought I had to use a sponsor, so I did. And I thought I had to do whatever my sponsor said in order to get recovered. And so my sponsor told me, this one told me I don't have to use a plan of eating. This one told me to go to meetings, so I did. Let's see, what else did she have me do? I mean, some of these. So I did use some of these tools in the beginning. I will say that my sponsor often told me to go to meetings in order to get out of my own head. And I enjoyed going. I would go to a phone meeting. There's one that I would call in and I would listen. They had a speaker at the beginning. They would kind of tell their story of recovery, and then they would open the group up to shares. And I loved that meeting. It was a good one. And so every night I would just go to my sink and I would turn that meeting on and I would do the dishes while I listened. And I would think, oh, I can't wait until one day it's me. I'm the one who's giving that story of success. So I really enjoyed that meeting. But my whole entire plan of recovery changed. Even though I was using a sponsor who did not require me to use a food plan, which was wonderful. I feel like that was the missing piece that I needed all of those years. Once I was a few months into my process, into my program, not even a few months, because like I had switched sponsors during those few months and gone back to binging and then got a new sponsor. So here I was working with my second sponsor. We've been working together maybe for, I don't know, a month or two, and I still felt like a newcomer. I was still going to meetings and introducing myself as a newcomer and leaving my name and phone number so that people could reach out to me. That's one of the tools listed, telephone. You can use like to reach out to people. So I felt like a newcomer, and I was getting a lot out of the fellowship. I was getting a lot out of people reaching out to me and checking up on me and those kinds of things. But then one day my sponsor told me, "Hey, you're ready to sponsor." I was like, "I'm ready to sponsor? What do you mean I'm ready to sponsor? I'm not ready to sponsor. I just ate a whole carton of ice cream in 24 hours just a couple weeks ago. I am not on the other side of this." And she said, no, 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 you're ready to sponsor. You can't really recover unless you sponsor. That's step 12. No, it isn't. And so you kind of have to, but you are ready. You've gone through the first 9 steps, so you can tell someone else how to do them. So you're ready to sponsor. So now go to meetings and introduce yourself as a recovered, available sponsor. Well, I was not recovered. I didn't want to be available, but I also believed I had to do whatever my sponsor said in order to recover. And if that's what she was telling me to do, then I guess I had to do it. So I started going to meetings, and instead of introducing myself as a newcomer, I started introducing myself as a recovered available sponsor, and then I would promptly pray that nobody would call me. I was mortified. I felt like I was lying. I felt like I was lying for selfish reasons. That was extremely confusing to me because it was my understanding that this whole program is about teaching us how to let go of selfishness and let go of dishonesty, that our recovery required us to let go of selfishness and to be honest. And so for me to be required by my sponsor to now lie for selfish reasons was really confusing for me. So like I said, but I also believed I had to do whatever my sponsor said. And so I decided to reconcile it this way. I figured I only had to introduce myself as a recovered available sponsor if I went to meetings. So I stopped going to meetings because I didn't want to have to introduce myself in a way that didn't feel honest to me. And so then I kind of stalled out on my program, and I just got really confused. I just didn't like the progress I was making. I was confused why my sponsor was telling me I was ready to sponsor when I clearly wasn't ready to sponsor. And so I thought maybe I do need a plan of eating because I'm not progressing. I was stalled out at 294 pounds. I had lost a few pounds since coming into the program several months earlier. I had stopped gaining weight, but here I was just hovering constantly at 294. I wasn't losing any weight for months. And again, I was stalling out in my program. There were still so many things about it I didn't understand. Things that my sponsor didn't understand, I didn't know at the time, but she wasn't recovered. Make sure you know if your sponsor is recovered or not. There's a video below that talks about how to choose a sponsor. Be sure to watch it if you haven't. And so anyway, at that time, I did switch sponsors because my sponsor left. She went to a different fellowship. And so I'm like, you know what, this time I'm going to use a plan of eating. And this time I'm going to use a sponsor who requires a plan of eating. And so for 6 weeks, I worked with someone who required a plan of eating. But I decided I wasn't going to, label trigger foods or red foods. I just was going to do 3 meals and 2 snacks a day. And my sponsor, though, she believed in like trigger foods and red foods. So she had a really, really strict plan of eating. And we worked together for about 6 weeks. I did well. Like I was able to stick to my eating plan. I had already been doing regular maintenance steps, 10 and 11 and 12 for several months, probably about 6 months at that point. And so for me to then transition into this place where I was trying to, have a food plan, it was a pretty calm process for me because I had been already unraveling the emotional dysregulation in my chest, the emotional dysregulation by applying 10 and 11 and 12 constantly. And so I was in a much more peaceful emotional state, so I was not as dependent on the food, and I found it fairly easy to institute a plan of eating that did not require me to take out sugar. And after several weeks of working with my sponsor, though, she, like, her food plan, I guess, she wasn't recovered. Go figure. I didn't know until later. And it's kind of dangerous to work with someone who isn't recovered because so anyway, but she dumped me. She was like, I'm sorry, my food plan is getting more and more strict, and I'm getting, my sponsor is giving me more and more guidelines on this, and I need to have more time to spend on my food prep, so I can't sponsor anymore. After she left the relationship, I felt abandoned and angry and resentful. So all of those emotions that I had been working on regulating for several months, all of a sudden came flooding back into me. I also felt like, wow, now my sponsor isn't here. She's not looking over my shoulder. I can eat whatever I want and do whatever I want. So I started binging. That's when I realized I had been using my sponsor actually as my higher power. And so the plan of eating, like all of these are tools I have used at different times. Um, and then I have kind of stopped using them. I don't even use a sponsor anymore. Once I found my recovery, once I found my sure and solid food neutrality, I started to find that my sponsor was actually, actually as I started to sponsor other people, I felt like my sponsor was becoming a little bit controlling, and she was inviting her sponsor into the relationship, and together the two of them were being kind of controlling of how I was sponsoring. But I was in a place of total food neutrality and freedom, and I felt like, you know what, I feel really good in the relationship I have with my higher power. I feel like I have this dialed in, and I'm going to continue forward with my higher power as my sponsor. So I don't use a sponsor anymore. I also don't sponsor, but you can look at my video on sponsorship to get a little bit more of information there. So yeah, the tools are here. Use them if they help you. I don't really go to meetings anymore. Not really. I mean, I will go sometimes to share my story, to help other people for sure. I'm very active in different Facebook groups. Obviously, I'm making a video right now, so I try to be very helpful where I can be helpful in this space for sure. But I don't have a really heavy regimen for these tools. I do not use a plan of eating. I do not sponsor, nor do I use a sponsor. I don't really go to meetings. I don't do reach out calls. I do a lot of phone work to like answer people's questions though. I spend a lot of time talking to other members who have questions. I'm a writer first and foremost in my life. So I write in my journal, but that's just because I'm a writer. I don't have an action plan, anonymity, service. I do a lot of service, but not because I'm trying necessarily to be true to this list of tools. I recognize that these tools come and go. Use them if they're helpful, but don't if they're not. And if at any point there's a single tool that gets in your way of feeling like you are being successful with the steps, please stop it. So for perfect example, and probably the one that you'll find most relevant to you, is the plan of eating. It is really, really hard. We have an addiction to these patterns in our life. It's hard. You are not supposed to be able to build a dam against this by yourself. That's the point of doing the steps. As you do the steps, it brings the power of God into your life to do it for you. He's the one who brings the miracles. Working the steps invites God, bring and gives him space, and he's the one who does the miracle. Don't put that kind of pressure on yourself to feel like you have to audition for his help by first doing the miracle yourself. What do you need God for then if that's the case? So be very, very careful on how you apply the tools, and don't ever let the tools frustrate what you're doing with the steps. I highly recommend that you study the 12 steps to recognize what they are and how to apply them in your life, and also be really familiar with what the tools are, because it's important to know what's optional. And when people are saying you have to use a sponsor, you have to do a plan of eating, you have to have a plan of abstinence, all these things, no, you don't. And don't let that frustrate your progress by thinking that you have to do things that are not being required of you, because then you will give up. You will be exasperated. You will be exhausted. You feel like you failed. You feel like you did it wrong when you didn't. So I hope that's helpful to you. Also, some of those other things like 90 meetings in 90 days. I mean, if you choose to use a sponsor at all, your sponsor might require you to do different things, and just decide those on a case by case basis. But also, I would never ever put your recovery in the hands of someone else. So as the more that you go back to the text and read it, and the more that you familiarize yourself with what the 12 steps are and what the 12 steps aren't, the more powerful you will be in your own recovery. Don't leave it in the hands of another human to tell you how to do this or how not to do this. Go to the text yourself. Make sure to have that conversation with your higher power yourself so that you can get that insight and wisdom yourself. You don't need a gatekeeper standing in between you and your higher power, or even you in this program. You just need your higher power. And the 12 steps are there as like scaffolding to help plug you in to your higher power so that he can give you the direction you need in order to recover. So I hope that's helpful as we talked about the difference between the 12 steps of addiction recovery and the tools. The magic is in the steps for sure. The tools, use them as they help you, and maybe you'll outgrow some of them. Maybe you'll use different ones at different times. Feel free to experiment and see the ones that feel good and the ones that serve you. But as soon as they don't serve you, move on and drop them.